In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer. I am very happy to introduce a dear friend of mine to our listeners today, Randy Wright. Hi, Randy.
Hello, Eric.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
So far.
Yeah, so far. First of all, just thank you for coming on to our program and being willing to share your story. I know you have a very important story to share with people and what you've been through. Let's start by just telling us a little bit about you and your family and your background and those kinds of things.
Where to begin? So I've been married to my wife for, I think this is 28 years now. You kind of lose track after 20-ish.
Yeah.
Don't tell her I said
Just
that.
remember when you get to 30.
Yeah.
That's important.
The zeros and the fives you got to remember,
Zeros
right?
and fives, yeah.
So, 4 daughters, 4 beautiful daughters. And I guess by trade, I went to school for be a programmer. I'm not a programmer anymore. I can't stand being in a cubicle. Mm-hmm. So we moved beyond that, and we're trying our hand at sales stuff. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Did you grow up in Utah?
I grew up in northern Utah my whole entire life. Well, except for about maybe the first 3 years of my life, I grew up in California. Mm. That's a whole story we could probably lightly dive into. But yeah, I grew up in northern Utah, graduated from high school in northern Utah, went to school in northern Utah, met with my wife lightly on my mission, but I served a Latter-day Saint mission in Florida. And
what mission in Florida?
Mine was the Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah,
I served in Tampa and Orlando. So.
I know you had the panhandle
That's
stuff.
Right, yeah,
it's awesome. Now it's all like one big gathering up there.
Yeah,
it's weird. So,
was she living in Florida?
No, was she
a missionary there?
Nope. I was such a, for lack of a better way, I was such a dog in the MTC. Is back before social media was a thing, back before emails, back before all that. So we had to write. So we had to find pen pals.
Oh yeah.
So we had a couple girls in my district in the MTC in my class, and I'm like, hey, do you have any sisters to write? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, oh sweet,
So her brother?
No, it was her sister.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of why she ended up writing me. Why Stacy, my wife, ended up writing me, because that sister doesn't particularly like males a lot, butt heads quite a bit, and I guess I could see why. But anyway. I've totally blew it off and forgot all about it. By the time we left the MTC, I never got the address, and I get this letter in the mail, and it was my future wife at that time, I guess, and we wrote for 2 years.
Wow.
That's on and amazing. Off, and she probably got engaged like 3 or 4 times during that time while I was in Florida, and she was in southern Utah going to school.
You must have been a good writer to convince her to hold off,
Yeah, we didn't have social media, so she couldn't, check out my profile and
was she from
stalk me or whatever. She was from Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, that's right.
Yeah,
I remember she's a big Packers fan.
Huge Packers fan.
And
I have to become a Packers fan by proxy.
Yeah,
or else it causes
problems. But is
problems.
it Raiders for you?
Oh yeah,
Raiders.
Yeah,
Broncos.
I know.
Yeah,
we're having rough years.
yeah,
really.
Sure. Yeah.
It's bad.
Okay, so you guys dated and then got married after your mission, and then you've been in northern Utah for all that. So
a good portion of that. For the first probably year of our marriage, we were finishing up her school at Southern Utah University, and then I wanted to come back up and go to Utah State because this is where I grew up and was familiar to me. So that's what I wanted, and we moved back up here and
Been here ever since.
been here ever since.
And then, like, hobbies wise, I know you've traveled. You like to travel. You've done some. Have you done some like Ironman things?
Yeah, I got pretty heavily into the Spartans.
That's
the
right.
last little while. My 64-year-old uncle called me up one day and said, "Hey, do you want to come run a Spartan?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Well, I'm going to." I'm like, "Well, that means I have to then, because I can't have my 64-year-old uncle toasting me." So we went and did that crazy things, and it turned into more crazy things doing it, and
That's so cool.
it was really fun.
So how many of those have you done now?
Five of them.
Wow, good for you.
Been kind of sporadic the past few years. So
Yeah. Good for you. That's great. Well, you and I, we used to live in the same neighborhood.
Yep.
My wife taught your daughters piano lessons, and we got to know
That's
each
cool.
other in our church congregation together, and so we've been friends for a long time now. Why don't we start into telling a little bit about your story? Where would you like to start with that?
I kind of thought about this for a while. Like, honestly, you contacted me like a few months ago about doing this. And when I thought about it, it literally kept me up for like about 3 weeks in a
I'm
row.
so
No,
sorry.
it's fine, because I knew that I really needed to stop hiding from a lot of things. And so I didn't really know where to start. So part of it is let's go to like a little bit of where I'm at now, and then we'll
Yeah,
skip back
that's
to
a great idea.
the first. Sorry. Right now, I think that in today's society, we lack a little bit of mental toughness, and I mean that in the softest way, really. We all want to, fall into that victim mentality and be validated by, our experience and going along that path. So that's kind of what a little bit what I wanted to start with. I'm no different. Like, there is certain things that I need to get grip of and, bite down and go. With that, my story, I would say, starts probably right around when I was 12. And I haven't really ever shared this with anyone. So when I was 12, we had 7-Eleven in the middle of town. And back then, arcade games were huge because you didn't have the game console in your house. If you did, you were a rich kid. And Mario Brothers just came out. And I always idolized my cousin. He was like huge in my eyes, and he's probably like 2 or 3 years older than me at the time. So just barely underage of driving, not quite there. And I go into the 7-Eleven one day, and he's there with his friend, Craig Reeves, who I idolize this guy. He's the nicest kid ever. And they were playing this game, and you'd stack your quarters up there to save your line, save your spot for the next game. And
Street Fighter 2, we did that.
yeah, I was huge into that one too. So, my cousin went out of the store, came back in, and was talking with Craig. And he's like, "Hey, we got to go." And he's like, "Okay, dude, take over my game." And I was like, "What?" That's unheard of. Once you play your game, you keep hold of your spot.
In case you got to put your initials.
And plus, he left like 2 quarters up there. He's like, "Take my quarters, you can play them too." I'm like, "What?" So, a week later, they found his body behind the bathrooms at Mack Park, and he committed suicide. And that's the first time that death ever really took hold of me. And I felt, I was 12 years old, so all I could really think of is like, I'm never going to be able to pay his quarterback, He let me play that game. So that's kind of my first real big thing with death. And then we go later on with, we get into high school, and it's my junior year, not graduated, but went into this summer, and there's this kid, his name's Rhett Tolman, and he was probably all but 5'1", just this scrawny little kid. And he would get teased all the time. Not like bullied teased, but I mean, maybe he did. Actually, looking back now, he did. But I was always trying to be nice to him. And his big thing that he wanted to be was a bodybuilder, 5'1", and just wanted to get really big and jacked. And he's always carrying around the next Muscle magazine, reading the articles, whatever. Well, they found him in his basement hanging from the rafters. And I wasn't close friends with him, but I was like kind of devastated. I'm like, how in the world would anyone come to that where they want to end their life by just being, he must have been brutally teased by a lot of people. The next time that I had to kind of deal with death in my life was my Aunt Nancy, who was my cousin Casey and Craig. It was her son. It was her. She got cancer, and she had always taken me to church with her. And that's how I kept like somewhat of a solid base. My family did never grow up going to church. They never said don't go, or they always encouraged it because they're like, don't turn out like me, My dad drank. My mom just kind of went along for the ride, and it's kind of a miracle I'm not an alcoholic in and of itself. But when my Aunt Nancy died, that was a little bit more of a devastation in my life because she was always there, and she's the one that actually kind of gave me a chance to stay grounded with Christ and church and have some type of spiritual chance in life. Sorry, excuse me.
You're good.
And then not long after that was my beginning of my senior year, and then a few months into my senior year, I lost my grandpa Wright from emphysema. He had a hard life. He was smoker, drinker, was in the military, and that's just how he kind of turned out. So I was like no stranger to like people dying. And if we fast forward, I go on my mission, and I jokingly kind of told everybody, I'm like, look, if anybody dies while I'm gone, while I'm serving my mission, I'm not coming home. You're already gone. I'm like, I'm not trying to be mean or brutal or anything like that, but I know where you're going. I know I'll see you again. And that was kind of my mentality that I took. And for better or for worse. Well, that's kind of a test that God gives you sometimes. And I got to the end of my mission. I was 2 years and a month in. I was going to extend and go even a few more months because I had 2 new trainees that I was training in my area, and they had no clue on what was happening. I get a call in the evening time, and it was the president of our mission. And he's like, do you know your grandma's not doing well? I'm like, yeah, she's been in, care for quite a while. My mom's been, every time we get a chance to call our parents, we would call our parents on certain holidays or write letters always. And so he's like, you're pretty close with her, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm really close. Like, that was kind of my surrogate mom growing up. She was always taking me under her wing and whatever. And he's like, well, your mom called and said she's on her deathbed. She's not going to survive very long. And I kind of had a decision to make. And I told my mission president, I'm like, look, I'm not going to leave these 2 guys alone. And this is how I felt. I felt like my grandma would not pass away until I got home. So I'm like, I will stay 2 more weeks. I'll get them all situated in this area, and then I'll go home. And so he's like, okay. And then he calls me up at the end of 2 weeks. He's like, all right, are you ready to go? And I'm like, yeah. And so they sent me home on a Sunday, which is unheard of. Mm-hmm. And I got home, and she lasted about 2 weeks after I got home. So we were able to have like a conversation and, love you and whatever. And then I got married like a year after that to my wife, and then not long after she got done and we moved back up to northern Utah, we were expecting our first child, Emily. And she was a surprise, unplanned, but, welcomed. It was kind of time. We were drifting and just didn't know where we wanted to be in life. And
you mean drifting, like drifting spiritually?
No, we didn't have our priorities straight. Like we were shopping for sports cars type thing,
okay. Yeah. Okay.
We weren't thinking family or anything. We're just like, hey, we need a hot rod. We need to,
Yeah.
So we go shopping for cars, and then like 2 days later, she's like, I think I'm pregnant. I'm like, you're not pregnant. There's no way. There's no chance. Just thinking back, and I was like, there's no way. We're careful every time.
Mm-hmm.
And she was pregnant. So fast forward to July 8th, 98 is when she was born. And the day I brought her home was the day I lost my grandpa Gleason. And that is what really destroyed me, because he was a absolute rock and pillar in my life. And I was in charge of the family prayer at the funeral. You gather in before they take the casket in and they do the actual eulogy. And they wanted me to do the prayer, and I'm like, okay. So I get up and I bow my head and I go to say the prayer, and it is dead silent for like 2 minutes. I can't talk, can't speak. I think it was right at the verge my uncle was going to start saying the prayer and step in when I finally gathered enough to say, okay, here we go. And we got through that one. And then we lived our normal life for a long, long time. Really did. I think that, as a side note, in our community, in our Latter-day Saint community, we have this stigma of we're always trying to provide like the perfect home, the perfect environment, and we get caught up in that. We get really caught up in that. Like, it's kind of like the keeping up with the Joneses, but it's the church stigma of it. You're like, oh, well, the Stauffers, they're over there. That's the perfect family over there. They don't ever fight. They have their family home evening. Everybody is so quiet. They read their scriptures. They say their prayers.
Man, we really did pull the wool over your eyes. That's really good. Yeah. But yeah, that does. It exists. That's what happens.
But we all get caught in it. And
it doesn't help that we're, these religious communities are so tight-knit and so interwoven in our activity with each other that we start to gather those perceptions, although they're not accurate, right? And then we start to put pressure on ourselves that this is the way it's supposed to be, what it should look like.
Yeah. And, we were no different. My wife's like, oh, we gotta do this. And I would say we lose a little bit of sight of why we're doing what we're doing, rather than for the views for other people. It's the actual growth inside. And I'm not saying that that's like everybody is
right.
is part of that.
But that's the phrase I was going to say. It's like we lose vision of what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not for a perception. It's not for a product.
Nope.
This is about people. These are about individuals. And
Yeah.
this is about our children and our spouse, you know?
Yeah, and it's hard to say that sometimes it takes the crisis to swing that vision back to where it really needs to be. And of all the things that I've experienced in my life, all the people that I've just shared with, like death and stuff, it still didn't give me a perspective on what the most important thing is. And, you know, you still keep tricking on and thinking that we have to chase that perfectionism, and it causes so much problems and grief within your own family, because husband and wife, they have their own views of what perfection is, and it usually and it usually will cause you to headbutt a couple times. And Stacy and I were no strangers to that. And that's been kind of hard to acknowledge, because nobody wants to acknowledge that, you know, that you're fighting with your wife, or, you know, we have this perfect marriage. We always go to bed not mad at each other. We, you know, we talk it out, and we kneel down and we pray, and then everything's all. I've slept a few times out on the couch.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and
it's probably not for snoring either.
No, it's because I did some pig-headed things, or I didn't agree with the way she was doing stuff, and, you know, she's been mad enough that she slept on the couch a few times too. And I'm like, well, that's really something if you're the one in bed and she's the one out on the couch.
I've been there.
So I really think that it kind of brings me to my least favorite scripture. Can I share that?
Yeah. That's a great way to set this up. Least favorite scripture.
Least favorite scripture is, "Be therefore perfect." And this is just me. This is my own little Randall doctrine, if you will. I think it was lost in translation, that scripture. I don't think the way we take it is the way it's meant to be. And by that, I mean, in the LDS community, we don't give grace enough. It's always work. You're working towards it. You're working. You're busy like a bee. You're gathering the nectar, you know, trying to make the honey, and it's a lot of work, and you got to fill that glass jar up. And it's not the case in my experience. Every day we have is a new day. Sometimes your glass is all the way full and your cup runneth over, and you can share that with other people, and, you know, you feel it. You feel like, okay, I've accomplished a good thing today. And then there's the next day where you're a quarter full and you think that you are the worst person on earth because you're only a quarter full. That's where the grace is supposed to come in. You know, the grace of Jesus Christ fills up and overflows your cup when you cannot. And it happens more often than not. And I never realized that until much, much later in life, like 9 years ago. So, and that's why we're here.
Yeah. Before we get to that next part, what you said about sometimes crisis or tragedy is what it takes to shift us. And before you share this next part of the story, because I know how heavy it is, what I hope that that you'll realize, Randy, in your courage to come and share this, is that hopefully your story can help someone come to those realizations that you've had to come to the hard way without having to go the hard way. and that's the beauty of that courage that you're having to share this, is that I know although I can never imagine the depths of pain that you've been through for what you're going to share, as a witness of you, I don't know that I can convey to you what you've taught me, and the courage that you've given me. It's like proxy almost. And we've had some sacred conversations together. Some right around the event that happened, and those are things I'll take with me my entire life. And I know that doesn't outweigh the pain. And I know it doesn't and it's not to try and replace it at all. But it is the reality. You have blessed me, and by you sharing these things, you will bless others. So I thank you. So, do we want to go to that night? Do you want to start a little bit earlier?
We'll jump back up to the present for a second.
Yeah.
So honestly, what you see before you is not a whole individual. Like, I am broken, and how I have dealt with things is you build a wall around. I built a wall around it. And it's a defense mechanism, so you don't have to deal with the stark reality of the situation. And I won't say that it's healthy, and I won't say that it's not healthy either, because you do have defense mechanisms built into your body where you're like, in order to deal with this, I got to compartmentalize it somehow, and that's how I've dealt with it. And I don't expect in this life to be made whole, really. I can accept that I'm a broken person and know that the grace of Jesus Christ can fill up and fill in the cracks of where I'm broken. Some days I'm more broken than others. So, sorry.
You're good.
I'll start with, in November of 2014, my wife and I were standing in our bedroom, and we had made it through a lot of hard times in our marriage. And we were standing there in the house that we'd always dreamed of, even bigger than what we dreamed of. And a life, career-wise, that I couldn't have asked for a better. I was working out at Hill Air Force Base. I loved what I was doing. I was programming. I was doing all the things. And we were standing there. I remember we were standing by the window and discussing how good it was. And we were both at the same time, we're like, well, what's going to happen? Because when life's rolling good, that's usually when something comes out and trips you up. To rewind even further, before we moved, Emily was struggling in middle school.
This is your oldest daughter.
This is my oldest daughter, Emily. And struggling with, finding her way, finding her niche, finding her friends, And we would throw parties, pizza parties, to have people come over and try to get the little social niche going, like parents do. They're like, you going to do anything for your child. And and so we'd put on those parties, we'd do those things, and it just never really quite clicked for her. She was always somewhat socially awkward, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm at a disadvantage. I have 4 daughters, and I have a wife, and I have a female dog. I'm the only guy in the house. This is not working. So, she faces what every preteen and teen faces in that life. Uncertainty. They're not, where do I go? Who's my friends? Like, how do I, function in this life? So, we moved out to Providence, and I thought we had found a niche, a better way. And, she got into high school, and things seemed to be evening out. Actually, middle school is really where I should focus on. Middle school, it got so bad that she got into cutting. And I never understood it until later, and I'll go over that in a little bit. And she would cut her arms. Like, these were permanent scars. Like, she would peel up pieces of skin and peel them off. And she'd had friends that would encourage this and watch her do it too. And it was hidden from us for probably about 3 or 4 months until you can't really hide it anymore. And then when you see it, I'm sorry, you're absolutely devastated as a parent. You're like, how in the world did I miss all these cues? And you start going into, I'm the worst parent ever. Like, there's no way that I should have been entrusted with this beautiful child. And how could I mean, you just flushed down the toilet with it.
Yep.
I was able to, I remember pinning her up against the wall and said, "What is wrong with you?" And she's like, "I don't know." I'm like, "You have to promise me that you will never do this again." And I had the type of relationship where when she promised me to do something, she would do it. And I know she didn't do it for a long time, but even then, I'm not going to be like, well, that's my daughter. She promised me she's never going to do it again. I know she ended up like doing her hip toward, trying to keep it out of sight, out of mind. By the time she got into high school, everything seemed to be evening out. She seemed to be getting along with finding her niche, finding her friends. Started working for a landscape company, Ryan Bradshaw, who was a phenomenal guy for her. He was in our congregation, and he had this landscaping company, and she went to him and said, "Hey, can I work for you?" And he said, "Absolutely, we'll train you how to do that." And then a little further in life, she started working for this pizza place. We had friends that owned the Firehouse Pizza in town, and they're like, "We're hiring." So she was working the 2 jobs, and I'm like, as a dad, I'm pretty proud. I'm having a daughter that's like stepping up and working 2 jobs and doing the things, and she gets through her junior year and into the summer, and she turns 17 end of June. And she has like these glamour shots taken, her senior photos, and they were awesome. They were taken, and she showed us the prints and whatever, and I was like, "Oh, those look really good. Those are going to be awesome." And then a week later, like, she'd kind of started getting back into some old habits. Like, she'd get off at night at the pizza place and not come home right away, and not quite be late for her next job the next day. And so I'm like, we'd already been rattled before by the cutting and whatever, and there's starting to be some signs of that. And I'm like, we're going to have a conversation on, keeping your head on straight and doing the right things and don't fall back. And anyway, I went to go work out July 8th. at like 10 o'clock at night. And I go work out. I come home and I'm in my workout clothes. My wife's sitting in the bed with her iPad and she's like, Emily's not home yet. And I'm like, dang it. All right. And by this time, you know, technology's full blown. We can track where kids are and whatever. And I get on my phone and I see that she's in Wellsville. I'm like, and she's not answering texts from her mom. So I text her and she doesn't text back. And this is when you go into not mad parent mode, but you're into, you know, they're trying to avoid me parent mode. And in this day and age, your phone's never off and it's always connected and whatever. And I know that she's going to say, well, I ran out of battery. You know, that was my thought. Mm-hmm. So we're in the bedroom and my wife's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I guess I'll go find her. So I hop in my truck. It's a 2005 crew cab Duramax, 3/4 ton. And I pull up the map on my phone and I head out to Wellsville looking for her. And the whole time I'm like, what can I do to really like help her understand what this really is and what she needs to find out. So I find where she has her car parked. I park just a little bit down from the block. I walk back. I have the keys on my keychain, so I get in the car and I'm going to move it so that she has to call me or text me. And then I'm going to light her up of why she hasn't texted me or called me back or whatever. That was my whole plan, is just to move the car to get her to call me, to say, the car's gone, I don't know what to do. Well, in my brilliance, I left my keys in my truck, and it's parked not too far down the road. She comes out and sees my truck, so she gets in it, and by the time I'm walking back down the street, she's driving up, and I'm like, what are you doing driving my truck? You know, just going to stupid parent mode all of a sudden. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what are you doing here at this party? You have work tomorrow. Why aren't you, you know, what is it that you think you're doing? I don't know, because I just wanted to hang out and this, that, and the other, and started giving me all the excuses in the world. So she gets out of the driver's seat, gets in the passenger seat. She's like, where's the car? And I'm like, it's around the corner. I'll take you around. So she gets in the truck, and I get in the driver's seat, and we drive down. And I had my phone in my hand at the time, and I just set it in the center console and left it there. And she's like, we need to talk about this. I'm like, we'll talk about this tomorrow morning when you wake up. And she's like, what do you mean? We can talk about it now. And she's just started having like kind of a freak out. I'm like, just get in your car, follow me home. We'll talk about it in the morning. And she wouldn't get out of the truck. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, we'll just come back for the car in the morning. So we drive away in the truck. And I was so mad at the time that I really didn't want to talk to her, because I knew. I'll step off for a second and say, when men speak to women and girls and your daughter, you can do a lot of damage by what you say. Mm-hmm. And you got to check yourself a lot of the time and swallow your pride, swallow your anger, and just deal with it on a different time and day. And that's what I was feeling inside. I'm like, I can't. I just want to freaking rip you a new hole. So, so we start driving, and she's got her stuff for work tomorrow left in the car, all of her clothes, both the different clothes. She's got her outfit for the pizza place and for the landscaping. I mean, you can landscape in anything, but has like this certain shirt that she likes to get dirty, and that's the only one. So we start driving, and she's trying to get me to talk the whole time we're driving through Wellsville, and there's this windy turn before you get on the straightaway to get to Mendon, where we live. So we get around the first turn, and I get this funny feeling. I'm like, I think she might jump. And so I took the corner a little bit fast, and she didn't do anything. And I'm like, all right, I'm just whatever. So she starts.
Did you feel like she might jump because she was getting so angry and so maybe some irrational behaviors kind of seeming irrational?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a guy, so I watch all the guy movies, and that's all my daughters ever saw and did. Yeah, they see you jump out of the car and you roll and you're fine. Yeah. You get up and they dust them off. There's no whatever. So I'm like, thinking that she might do that, and then she starts talking to me and it's like, Dad, I need to go back to the car. I need to go get my clothes for tomorrow, and just starts almost not hysterical, but starting to get there. And we get around the top corner, and I'm like, we will go back tomorrow. I'll take you there tomorrow morning to go get the stuff. No, I got to get my clothes now, and pulls the door open and jumps out. And we're probably going 40, and everything happened in slow-mo. I thought I had this instinct of don't slam on your brakes because you'll catch her and drag her. And the next thing I know, my truck jumps up and down, just bucks, and I slam on the brakes, and I slam it up into park, and I jumped out of my truck screaming her name, trying to look for her. Just yelling, and I thought I heard rustling. It's pitch black outside. Can't see anything. I don't have any light. And finally, I see her there on the ground. I roll her over, and so I tried to do CPR, and there's nothing I can do. There's no cars. My phone's in the truck, so I can't call. I'm not going to leave her. Mm-hmm. I just started screaming. Mm-hmm. And it had to have been 20 minutes before some car drove by, and I flagged them down and said, call an ambulance. And I went back and tried to do CPR again, and there's nothing I can do. Mm-hmm. The paramedics, the first responder got there, and she's like, what can I do or not? I don't even remember what she said. She immediately went to Emily, and I remember I was on my knees, just kneeling in front of Emily, just paralyzed on what to do. I'm like, please do something. And she checks her pulse and immediately starts trying to do compressions, tries a few other things, and then she's gone. She's like, you got to get up. The first responder's like, you got to get up. I'm like, I don't want to. So you got to get up. So the ambulance had got there by that time and was parked a little ways down the road. And I finally stood up and I just started to bawl. And she's like, it's okay, it's okay. And I said, it's not okay. She's like, I don't mean that. I didn't mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then they took me back to the ambulance and they started doing vitals on me. It's just their normal protocol that they do. And I don't know how long I was in there. And then...
did you have to explain what happened?
Multiple times.
Yeah. Because they probably questioned things and they just wanted to make sure the story was straight. That probably made it worse.
I had all sorts of meltdowns in that ambulance. Yeah. Like, I was all alone, and there was just the one first responder in there with me. This is a man at the time. I wish I had known all these people's names, but that was kind of the wall that I had built up to. Sure. It is my goal to go back and thank all these people individually. It's been 10 years, but I'll still do it.
Yeah.
I remember I had so many come aparts in that ambulance that I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I supposed to explain that how do I explain, and he's like, are you LDS? I'm like, yeah. He's like, do you want a blessing? I'm like, and all I could do was say, yeah. And the sheriff had shown up by then, and they had started their investigation. Because that's normal protocol when a death occurs, they got to do all their stuff. And so one of the officers there came in, and they ministered to me. And it did nothing. I'll be honest. There was zero comfort. I had zero comfort. And then one of the officers, I can't remember. He's like, "That's your truck down there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's my truck." And then he asked me, he's like, "What happened?" So I'd have to retell the story. And that was the first time I told the story was the one in the ambulance. And then the second time is the officer comes in and tells me. Then there's a lead investigator that he came in, and I had to tell him again and, relive the whole thing. And I later found out that he took extra long to go through all this whole thing because of what I told him in my story. He's like, I didn't learn this until way after. He's like, his father-in-law told me this story. I know I'm kind of jumbled around, but his father-in-law came to me later and told me the actual, why he did what he did. He's like, that man had already watched his daughter die before his eyes. I wanted there to be no question as to what happened. So I had to take a longer time to make sure everything synced up. His story that he told was feasible and was the way it happened. And
as painful as that must have been, that's pretty amazing that he had the wherewithal to think about that factor.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of, looking back, there was a lot of tender mercies that night, mm-hmm. if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of one of them mm-hmm. that came out of it. But I I relived that incident thousands of times in the first 2 days. That's all I could think about, was every second of me leaving my bedroom to the accident happening. That's all I could do, is go rewind and play, rewind and play, rewind and play. And it was only me to blame. And that's how it was. Obviously we accepted to go to counseling over it, and I was not consoled by any stretch of the imagination by any therapy, because they try to, and I'm not trying to downplay it.
Sure.
Like, if you have something like that happen, you do need to go talk it out. And,
yeah.
But all I could see was the things that I had done wrong, and it started a rabbit hole of anger, and you get caught up in that grief cycle. And everybody goes through a grief cycle. You should look it up if you haven't seen it. Anybody out there that's listening, and see what the grief cycle actually is. You get stuck in spots in that cycle. And my stuck spot for a long time was anger, because I felt like I was living a pretty good life. I was doing what I was supposed to do. And there only needed to be one little prompting for me to do something different. Don't take your truck. If I hadn't taken that truck, that wouldn't have caused that damage. Maybe it's, how come you should talk to her in the morning when she gets home? You know, go through all those things. So I never questioned that there was a God, that there was a Jesus Christ, or that there is a Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost there to prompt you and guide you. But what I couldn't understand is why I didn't receive that. Why? And it cost me something that's never going to be replaced in this life. I was so angry with God. So angry. Even now, I mean, you can kind of still tell I still can barely deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a grander story. It's not all, pain and misery, but
did you feel you probably went back and forth between an unloving God and self-blame?
Absolutely.
Back and forth, over and over and over. Did you ever receive any, not healing necessarily, but relief? Was there any thought or any action or anything that gave you some relief from that at any point?
This is the hard part to kind of explain. After it happened, there was immense outpouring of love from all the community. We had just moved from Providence, from being your neighbor, and we were pretty close-knit in our current neighborhood. And my first instinct was to withdraw from everybody and everything. There's kind of this story that I've always a little bit fell back on when raising my kids. There was a father in southern Utah where he'd taken his son out with him to go find a hunting spot. His son was like 2, maybe 3 years old. And it was about the time when Emily was about that age. And he parked his truck and went out and was looking. Well, he came back and his son had climbed out of the truck and gone missing. And they found him dead of exposure like a day or two later. And, that stuck with me to the point of which I would not, like, at the time, when you go to get gas at the gas station, you had to go inside, pay for your fuel, and then pump your gas. I mean, they still had a credit card machine, but nobody was swiping their card at the time back then. So I would literally unbuckle her every single time. I'd pump the gas, and then you'd have to go in and pay, or you go in and prepay. But anytime I left the vehicle, I would unbuckle her and pack her into the place with me. And that was everywhere. Like, if I was more than 5 feet away from the vehicle, and it wasn't just with Emily, it was all my kids. Mm-hmm. Like, they were with me. And all I wanted to do, kind of rewind, was, I thought I'd been doing things all right, and all of you, you were part of that, just wanted to get me out of the house and spend time with me. And I know that father that happened to that kid, he ended up committing suicide like a few weeks later. And I know everybody, I wasn't never had that ideation at all. I never thought that I was just it's time for me to check out by not doing that. However, everybody else thought worried that we're very worried. Yeah. My wife, my whole neighborhood, other friends. And so they took all my weapons and they took everything and relentlessly asked me out to go to dinner and to go to lunch. And so here's kind of the first pause or trigger, if you will, for me to realize that I need to do what other people are asking me to do that is a good thing. Because if I stay where I'm at, it's not going to help out anybody. It's not going to help out my family or anything. So against my absolute will, I went and did those things with you guys and with other friends. Like, I can't tell you, as every night somebody wanted to go out to dinner or out to lunch or go for a Jeep ride or, whatever it was to try to distract me. And in retrospect, that's what you should do. If that's your friend or your relative, don't let them be alone and suffer and do that thing. I know that they don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And if you are that person, I know you don't want to do it. But you got to go. You got to go and just wade through the pain. There is no getting around the pain. There is zero getting around the pain, even 10 years down the road. I build up my wall so I don't have to cry in front of a camera or in front of people about telling the story. And but if you can do it sooner, you won't end up like me 10 years down the road still struggling as much as you do.
So would you tell people that to do what we did, which was, hey, he's not going to want to do this. If I were you, I would want to shut myself in a room for the rest of my life, right? Mm-hmm. But we kept asking and kept, hey, we just want to be with you. We just want to be with you. Is that the unkind thing to do, or is it the right thing to do?
It is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to always try to be there. So I'll go through a few different stages that and a few different things for people to help. Mm-hmm. One of the things is we get into a rut where we don't know what to do. So we're like, hey, if you need anything,
cliche phrases.
Yeah. That person is not going to ask you to do anything.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very rare. They might ask you to say, you know what, I don't want to get milk if you'd bring me milk. Well, okay, here's the milk truck.
Yeah.
You know,
They go over the top.
yeah, they go over the top, which is fine.
Which is great.
But don't ask or don't say, if you need anything, I'll be there for you. You buy them a tree, you dig a hole in their front yard, and you plant the tree like you guys did. You're like, hey, this is how we want to express our love, and plant something that you can look at and you can remember. The other thing is my bishop, or the leader of my church at that time, out of the blue brought us this styrofoam cooler of just drinks, and full in there was like, I was huge into Red Bulls and whatever, and he packed that thing full of Red Bulls and caffeine and whatever, and against, everybody's better judgment.
Right.
Oh, energy drinks, those are terrible for you. And they're like, yeah, thank you. Track me in it's either this or alcohol.
That's right.
Which
which would you prefer?
Which would you prefer me on?
Yeah.
So if you are a person that really wants to help out and you don't know what to do, get down on your knees and pray for it. Really.
Yeah.
If you believe in God, you believe in Christ, they will prompt you on what to do. The other thing that you may or may not do, I would be pretty sensitive on this, is I can't tell you how many people came up to me before the funeral, during the viewing, during the funeral, after the funeral, where they're like, isn't the plan of salvation such a great thing? And that doesn't help me. That was like salt in the wound, really. Like, I know that you're meaning well and your intentions are, you need to look beyond and look to, the life after death, when you can hug your loved one again. But in the moment of you losing a loved one, you're caught up in your grief, and all you care about is the loss that you have and that you feel right there. And I'm not saying don't say those words, but be sensitive on when to say those words, because for me it was a trigger every single time, and that all it did was push the anger button even further for me.